About sometimes religious organizations is that people will have concerns or comments or bring things to our attention, and you don't feel like they get addressed or they're taken seriously or whatever else. I want you to know we have heard you, we understand where you're coming from, and we will be talking to Trent about his use of ducks material on his shirt. Um, the idea that Oregon keeps appearing on this platform is concerning to our board as well, and so actions are trying to be taken. We'll do our best. So, but I think the best thing to do is you personally let him know that it's really just not, you don't appreciate it. Tell him that you personally, that'd be great. So I'm teasing, man. I'm teasing. It's just, he keeps putting it up there and I got to say something about it. All right. So anyway, it's good to be with you guys this morning. Now, today is going to be kind of a cool, different kind of day. We are doing a hot seat Q&A Sunday, which means literally you can text in questions to the number that's going to be on the screen. I don't see these in advance. I don't get a hint in any way. Scott's just going to ask those questions in a minute. And I have to, on the spot, do my best to try to give a reasonable answer to whatever questions that you might have. So it's kind of a fun thing we do. It's a cool way of kind of letting you have some voice in maybe what you want to hear about or whatever else. So that's kind of thing. But before I get into that, I want to highlight a number of different things. And the first was that video right there. So that was Mark and Josie. And they are in Southern Asia. We put that kind of out there very generically because the part of the world that they're in, Christianity is not permissible in that part of the world. And so as they are cross-cultural workers, they're doing it in a very creative way. And I love what they're doing. There's this whole new movement within this world where it's like people are going into other environments, and it's not just simply about bringing Jesus to those environments, but it's also bringing kind of the whole spirit of what Jesus cares about to that environment. I think what we've just done in the Sermon on the Mount is a good example of the fact that Jesus cares about all the nooks and crannies of life, and so they do things like that. So they, have started this business there. They're employing local people there, so they're building relationship that way. And it's just a creative way of engaging in the culture. And I love it because in the book of Jeremiah, it talks about this, right? So God's like, hey, you're going to get punked by the Babylonians. You're going to be forced into exile to Babylon. And he says, but when you're there, do things really for the good of the city that you're in. Do things to bless the city. Do things that looks out for their welfare, because when you do that, it kind of looks out for your own welfare as well. And they are doing that in their location. And so if you would like to know more about Mark and Josie, you want to, just get their newsletter, connect with them or whatever else, there is the QR code for the WhatsApp app. I've never been on WhatsApp, but anytime I hear it, I just think about that old 90s commercial, WhatsApp. So anyway, you can do that and find out about them, and they are super, super cool people. Just love them to death, and they're doing great stuff where they're at there in Asia. We also have another cross-cultural team, and this is the Collins. So Amos and Heidi Collins and their kids, they're in Micronesia, and I joked last service, he's got the coolest job. He flies airplanes for Jesus. That is the coolest job to me. I go, that is so cool. And in Micronesia, there's all these, there's I forget, hundreds and hundreds of islands that are just connected by these little runways. And so he moves supplies, medicine, there's patients if they have to move them to a hospital. He handles all of that. And so they're a great family as well. And so if you'd like to know more about the Collins, what they're doing, connect with some of our cross-cultural workers, there's the email address up there. You can check that out. And they are great, great people. Both of these families make it back to the States every couple of years, and we get to see them for a little bit. But they are kind of homegrown here in the valley and everything else, and they're just doing cool stuff. So we want you to know about what they're doing. We want to make sure it's on your radar so you can be praying for them and aware of some of the great stuff that's happening. So that's one thing I want to share. The other thing I want to share is this last year, for just a minute before we get into the Q&A, this last year has been a great year for Redemption Church when it comes to just your generosity of time and treasure and everything else. You may not realize this, but this year we have seen you all contribute well over $100,000 to the good of our community at large in different kinds of ways. And then countless hours have been poured in as well. So I just want to share with you some of those things, because one of the things was the building. When we built the hub, we didn't want to build, quote, a church. You all are the church are people, your Redemption Church. This is a toolbox, right? That's why we call it the hub. It's the toolbox of doing things for the good of our city to try to bless our community. So just this year alone, I'm going to read off to you all the things this building has been used for. It has been used for Narcotics Anonymous, Momco, Cascade Community Theater, disaster preparedness relief classes, Girl Scouts, playtime at the Hub, a Valley safety meeting for all of the churches, classical conversations, a quilting group, which is rad, community toy swap, Love and Logics, Snoqualmie Valley Amateur Radio Club, Cedar Crest Lacrosse Banquet, and a Celebration of Life event. All of that stuff happened in this building in the last year, right? And we're stoked about that. I know you can clap for that because that's what we wanted. We were very much committed to the idea that we wanted this thing to get worn out, right? It's not for us to have our little clubhouse, you know what I mean? It's like we wanted to give it back to the city in a lot of ways, and we've had that opportunity. On top of that, man, you guys have given a lot of hours to the city. So Duvall Days, Halloween on Main Street, the Gleaners, which is a great, great opportunity for those who are just needing a little subsidy on food. It's every week. It's kind of run by Adventure Church, but we have people connected to that, and it's a great opportunity. We did a 6K for clean water. We did Light Up Duvall, VBS. We're very involved with Empower Youth Network to create mentors, to mentor kids in the public school system and everything else. And so you all are giving a ton of your hours to our community. And we love that because that's the essence of this. Like, we want to be engaged in those things. And then last, on the generosity, like I said, well over $100,000. We've given money to a STEM scholarship in the district, to Empower Youth Network, to Bridge Receiving, which, if you're not familiar with that, that is part of the foster program, but it's a really kind of cutting edge, different way of handling that. And so when the Bible talks about like widows and orphans, that's kind of our equivalent of the orphans. And so we subsidize that at a pretty decent level, and we want to do that even more. Also, hopefully you've not been arrested lately, but if you have been, and they pulled you up to the Duvall Police Department, you went, that's a really nice new police sign there. Yes, because you all made that possible through your giving. So you provided that sign for the police department. We've had a lot of individuals helped by giving around here. And then also recently there was the need of Adventure Church, right? So they were hurting financially on their building. They're a small community of faith, and there was a big financial need. They needed to raise $321,000, I think, in 4 weeks. And I'm like, I know that craziness. And so we brought it before you all, and you all contributed to that. Jeff called me this week and told me that the full 321 came in this week. So we are very excited for them. Very excited for them. And of that, he wanted to say thank you because it was people from Redemption, whether it was through us as an organization or people who just stopped by Adventure Church or whatever else to help them out. $83,000. You people contributed $83,000 to Adventure Church. And so they are very humbled and grateful for it. I know I am grateful that you all stepped up to do that. And I think that's just a testimony even to kind of the spirit of the churches in the Valley, how we tend to love each other and work together. There's not a competitive spirit. There really is a camaraderie and things. And so it's just really cool all the way around. And so I close with that to simply then share my own heart for just a minute, which is I just want to tell you guys, you make being a pastor here so easy in a lot of ways. Like, I am ridiculously blessed. I've been down that kind of memory lane a little bit, and even going into Thanksgiving week, I think you think about those things more, and I'm just like, man, you guys are the coolest people, and I get this privilege to be doing life with you and seeing how you just step up to things that are needed, and you love our community in the name of Jesus, and you bring Jesus in very authentic ways to your lives, and for me, I just know it really moves me in a lot of ways, and so been here for almost 18 years, and that's had highs and lows, good and bad. It is a really great season right now. I'm just having a lot of fun, and I'm just grateful to be doing it with all of you. So thank you for being just that stinking cool, man. You are that stinking cool. So with that, I'm going to have Pastor Scott come wherever he's at. There he is. He's going to come up now for the Q&A part of it. He's going to give me the questions that you all are asking, and we'll see how well it all turns out, because Matt is human. All right, so Scott, what things do they need to know? What things...
Well, we will try to answer every question. Very unlikely. You'll see why in a moment. Right, Matt?
I think Scott's trying to say Matt's long-winded, but if
no.
he says it that way.
We just have a lot of them.
Okay.
So we'll try to answer all of them. None of these are going to duplicate from the first service, so if you want to hear more questions, you can watch the YouTube from the first service. If you're old school, you don't have a phone that you want to text in, Jessie, if you hold up your hand, she will give you a 3x5
There's the lovely
card
Jessie. She's just like a little princess.
and
way
a pencil,
back
and
there.
so you can write it out old school. So the last service, Matt thought I started with a hard one, so I'm going to see if I can go easier right now.
Yay! Ease Matt into the cold pool. All right.
Oh,
So,
here. See how you do with this one. What's your favorite Bible verse?
ooh, it's a toss-up, kind of. They're related. It's gonna be the greatest command. I can make it simple, right? So whether it's in Matthew 22, Mark 12, Luke 10, all the same. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. There is no command greater than these. And I made a big stink about that throughout the Sermon on the Mount series, because even I was meeting with somebody yesterday, we were talking about this. The Greek word that joins those two concepts is what makes them really a singular command. It kind of equalizes them, and it reminds us that, hey, if I really love God, I have to love the people around me. And if I'm not loving the people around me, then I'm not really loving God, because God calls me to love the people around me, right? So it has this cyclical nature, right? Even another question in the last service was in regard to something else, but I talked about the problem that we as Westerners have is we tend to make everything linear, A to B to C. But in the Hebrew mindset and culture, everything was very cyclical. So even that command, as Jesus gives it, the first part of that command is the first tablet of Moses, and the second one is the second tablet of Moses, really, if you just distill down the two tablets. But the two tablets are still the one law of God. And so in that sense, I love the fact that I can't just be like, I love God, but I treat people terrible. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't work that way. Then God's like, then you don't really love me, because I told you to love them well. And if you really love me, you'll love them, especially the ones that don't love you. Right? To love your enemies, for example. If I really love God, I'm going to learn to love my enemies, right? Because I love him enough to do that. And they all bear his image, right? So in that's part of the reason I love them. They're his image bearer. Or what Jesus says in Matthew 25, like, when you did it to the least of these, you did it to me. All of that kind of comes together. So for me, I think that's probably the chief favorite Bible verse. So.
Thank you. Can I practice yoga as a Christian?
Sure. That was easy. All right, let's move on.
Okay.
So, no, I'm going to segregate this into two things. I know for some people this is like a hot topic, right? So, and I don't have a hot take on a hot topic. I'm going to try to keep it relatively simplified. I think there's many things in life that truly can be neutral, and then you could take it to a place that is either good or bad, right? So I'm going to parallel this in a different way. And this is, weirdly enough, it came up in first service just in a different context. So in 1 Corinthians, Paul's dealing with a community that's leaving their old pagan roots and they're moving into their new following Jesus lifestyle. But they live in a culture that still has a lot of those underpinnings. And one of the things that would happen in the Corinthian culture, depending on which god you worship, is that you would offer meat sacrificed to an idol, right? So they would offer, let's say, a cow, and then once the cow was sacrificed in the name of the idol, they would then take the meat and sell that so you could eat the meat, but it was meat sacrificed to an idol. And so there's a debate in the Corinthian church, like, can we eat then meat sacrificed to idols? Are we allowed to? And Paul, from chapter 8 to chapter 10 of 1 Corinthians, gets into the weeds on that and says, here's the bottom line. For those of you who don't let that bleed you into starting to go back to your old cultic ways, you can totally eat the meat, right? If your conscience is free, you can eat the meat. But if your conscience isn't free, it's risking you going into these old pagan ways, then you shouldn't eat the meat. So for one person, it's okay, and for one person, it's not. And it comes down to a level of conscience and a level of bleeding old ways into new things, right? And that was his concern always, is like, even the unequally yoked thing, everybody uses that for dating. It has nothing to do with dating. Like, are you equally yoked? I'm like, that's not why Paul uses it. Paul's using it in regards to trying to be a Christian and worship as a Christian, and also bringing in the pagan worship to the same thing and blending those two worlds together. So then fast forward to yoga. Yoga can just be some of the best exercise on the planet, and that's all it can be, and that it's fine. It would be like eating meat sacrificed to idol. For you, it's fine. If you go, no, I think this has pagan connotations, or I think there's this supernatural spiritual overtone to it, then for you it may not be okay. I think inherently it has a neutrality, and it's whatever is ascribed to it by individuals that kind of sways it one direction or another. So just me personally, this is not like, what's the church's position? This is just Matt's opinion. I don't find a problem with it unless you are making that or anything a medium of some kind of worship outside of Jesus, right? And I know of people, I'm going to rat out Janelle, right there. I remember years ago, she had the idea of even doing like a yoga group that was like set to Christian music and things like that. So again, I go, that's the redeemable element of it for sure. I think that'd be awesome. So my take is it's fine unless you're trying to use it as some kind of weird, kind of other than Jesus thing, other religious thing, and then maybe that's where you're getting into that territory. But that could be That can be true to a lot of different things, depending on what it is. You could say martial arts. You could look at that and say, well, maybe that's a gateway to that. And you can also, I don't know, do taekwondo for Jesus. It's cool. So, but you got to turn the other cheek, not just punch him in the face and do a rolling kick. I don't know. So maybe I don't know. Well, maybe is it Tai Chi would be more Jesus-like? I mean, maybe judo. Yeah. So yeah.
How can I deal with a parent and or spouse who has stereotypical ideas about Christianity, no matter the conversations I've had with them or how many times they've been to church?
Okay, I'll turn to the Sermon on the Mount. Sometimes you have to realize that it's pearls before swine, right? Remember that whole thing where he says, hey, don't judge lest you be judged, and then immediately says, but be judicious. And sometimes you just have to kind of know your audience. And you go, if I bring this up, it's only going to create friction and hostility. And so based on that, I'm gonna live my best Jesus to them, but I'm not going to put it in their face because it only agitates them. You know what I mean? And that's just a judgment call you have to make. Because I think sometimes people feel like, well, but if I'm silent, then I'm not being faithful. And I go, no, well, if you're living it, that's one of the ways you can be most faithful. And I think sometimes, even Jesus, like, they would pose questions to him and he wouldn't answer them. Like, Jesus sometimes leveraged silence too, right? So I think he knew, like, this is pearls and this is swine and this is not, I don't need to say anything. When he's on trial, talk about, like, the silent treatment. There is, and they're like, what about this and what about that? And he's just like, it's pearls and swine, man. No matter what I say, you don't care, right? So he even knew sometimes that silence is best and bliss. So I think when you have those people, you just have to, don't give them any reason to dislike faith more. In other words, be consistent in your faith. Don't be hypocritical. Don't back dumb horses in culture or life that they go, well, how can you be a Christian and you think that or believe that or follow that? Or just work really hard to be like Jesus and just realize that, you know what? Yeah, if I say something, it's just going to spark more frustration and anger, and that's not worth it for them and for us. And I think Jesus actually blesses that as an option. But if you have some margin for conversation, I think that's good. I think maybe I'm just going to add another thing to it, because I've had those people in my life as well. And I find sometimes they'll go, well, but Christians do this and this and this. And if there are things that Christians do this and this and this, and you've seen Christians do that, you agree with them, tell them that. You're right. Some Christians do that. I agree. It makes me agitated too, frustrates me too, makes me sad. Makes me sad that some Christians have a terrible reaction or reputation, or they back crazy things. Like there's this thing called apologetics, which is giving a defense of the faith. I think sometimes in modern apologetics, it's to also apologize for Christians' bad behavior and acknowledge that. Like, yep, some Christians do bad stuff, and you're right, I agree with you. That gets you some mileage you wouldn't anticipate too, just because you're conceding a reality as opposed to, I must defend everything about us even if we're doing dumb stuff. No, I think they appreciate when we're honest about our own weaknesses and mistakes. So that would be probably the best way to slice that one.
You're still open to personal questions?
Sure, maybe.
Do you ever get that Jeep muddy?
You should look at it now. My grandkids are like, Appa, your Jeep is gross. But it's from my gravel road. It's not really manly. All right. So yeah.
The Sermon on the Mount sounds beautiful but impossible. Don't lust, don't worry, or forgive endlessly, love enemies, be poor in spirit. Isn't this setting people up for guilt or failure? Why would anyone want to follow the teaching that feels unattainable?
That's really good. There's a part of it that I look at and I go, I think it really is, there is an essence to it that is unattainable. There's another part of it that I think it's like any exercise, right? Exercise is hard. It requires daily investment or a weekly investment. You're making decisions about nutrition, about rest, about resistance training and activity, cardio, whatever it is. Like, you're pulling all that together, and then it's a sustained drive in the same direction for year after year after year after year after year. And I think that's kind of what Jesus is introducing us to in the Sermon on the Mount when he says, hey, follow me. This is what it means to follow me. And that's going to be a journey that it doesn't just trend up. It's like this, right? But it's eventually getting up there. You're going to track in the right. If you keep kind of applying it and working it and trying to figure out how to churn through it and apply it better, because I said in the last service, the goal of the Sermon on the Mount is not a checklist of rules. It is the gathering of wisdom for life and how to react or act in all the circumstances that come our way. And we might react imperfectly, but in that we go, how can I do it better next time? And so the essence of the Sermon on the Mount is like setting a really high bar, but we shouldn't just go like, the bar's so high, so forget it, I'm not going to do it. It's like, no, I want to try to do my best. Now, I don't think Jesus is putting it out there as a guilt trip, nor to shame us. I think it's meant to inspire us. Like, we go like, wow, it seems hard, but boy, that seems like a much more beautiful world doing it that way. Like, that brings beauty to the world, because what we know is the way we as humans have been doing it hasn't gone great. Not really. There's always friction and chaos and division and everything else, and Jesus is trying to disrupt that with the only thing that can actually disrupt that cycle of mess. And so, for me, I look at the lofty nature of it, and I'm inspired to it and by it. And because of the way he modeled it with humility and generosity and everything else. And I go, that is more the angle I'd probably approach it. I know there's some in theology that say Jesus just gave a second law that's more impossible than the first law. So we would say we can't do it, so we just need to be saved by grace alone, and that's it. And I go, that's not at all the essence of the Sermon on the Mount. Sermon on the Mount is Jesus intends for us to try to do it. And I think when we blow it and fall, which I do, then I try to dust off and go, all right, mercies are new every morning. I'm going to try to do better today than I did it yesterday. And just keep being inspired to that action. I think there's some parts of it that are not hard, and I think there's other parts that are incredibly hard, right? Like some parts of it I go like, oh yeah, that's pretty easy in some ways. I think loving your enemies is really, really hard. That's why that's probably my favorite expectation of the Sermon on the Mount, personally, is that one, because it's the hardest. And I guess I kind of lean into, I want to do hard things in life. And so I'm like, that's hard. I want to do that hard thing. So part of it's probably personality, too. If you're like, I don't like to do hard things, well, it might be more of like how do I deal with the Sermon on the Mount? But if you're like, oh, I like the challenge of that. And the promise that there's blessing attached to it, because that's what he says at the beginning. This is the blessed life when you do it. And I know for me, as I try to lean into it more and more and more, I do sense the blessing of that. I'll give a personal example of this. So way before we started Redemption Church, we were part of another church. We were going through a big denominational squabble. We were trying to withdraw from the denomination. The denomination was very aggressive in trying to keep that from happening. And so they came not only against our church at the time, but against me very personally at the time too. Like it was like they were subpoenaing my financial records, my taxes. They hired a private investigator to investigate my life. It was like all kinds of stuff, right? Because they just wanted to keep the church from trying to withdraw. And I remember it was the love your enemies that got embedded into my brain as the thing I had to do for that entire 2 to 3 year process. I was just going to love these enemies. I'm going to love these enemies. I'm not going to get bitter and angry. I had moments of like, I would beat you with a billy stick if I had. But here's what that did though. Inside of me, I knew like, that's not right, Matt. You got to fight that thing to be angry about all of this, and you got to love your enemies. So 3 years, taxing hard, everything else. Eventually from that, Redemption Church was born. So there's a lot of blessing that came from it. But I remember a year after it was all said and done, I woke up one day, I went out in my backyard, and I'm like, I think I could have coffee with the head of the denomination today, and I'd be fine. It'd be cool. I don't feel any frustration or anger at that dude at all. And it reminded me of the blessing of doing the Sermon on the Mount. For years, it was hard every day to do that love your enemy thing. But man, talk about healing fast because I leaned into what was right. And then again, a year later, I'm like, I don't have bitterness. Where 5 years after that, I talked to other people in the denomination that were trying to get out. They were still like, just like, he's Satan incarnate. We hate him. He's the worst. I mean, and there was still just raging bitterness. And I'm like, yep, there it is, right? Doing hard things will pay off his blessing in the end, no matter what. Whether in this life or the next, I think it pays off. So, no, that was a long answer to that question, but I think it's meant to be more that spirit.
This one has a lot of emotion behind it, but I think it's important. Can you explain why saving a repentant rapist killer, but not the unbeliever, is just moral, loving, or righteous? And then the follow-up to that was, I find that the Bible only attracts unjust people wanting unjust favor.
That's really good. That's really deep. I like to the point of like, I don't think, it's going to be one of those times where I'm like, am I really answering that question? I fear I won't really be answering that question. I'm not intending to, like I'm trying to skirt it. I'll share different, I'll share my own tension, right? So now you're just going to get not an answer. You're going to get, I understand where you're coming from more. You're getting very human, Matt. You're not getting Pastor Matt maybe right now. I think one of the great enigmas of the doctrine of God or the way God works is mercy and justness, or justice. Mercy and justice. I still, in my 3 pounds of mushy gray matter between my ears, cannot put those two together well. And what I mean by that is, as soon as you engage mercy, you're overriding justice. And as soon as you engage justice, you're dismantling mercy. And I know we don't like that. We go, no, they're cohesive. And I go, well, not really, because if I go, justice is you pay for the crime that you've committed, I go, okay, that's justice. And I step and I go, but I'm going to be merciful, and I'm going to reduce that crime, change that crime, remove that crime. But then you go, well, then justice is no longer served. Now it's just mercy. And on the flip, if I go, you're going to be merciful, but then I bring justice to it, well, then you're no longer being merciful. It's just justice in play. And I understand the theology where we kind of, we find ways to put all those together. I just admit, with the person asking the question, I still struggle with what that is. Now, from that, I'll admit what I default to is probably mercy then. I go, okay, so God is merciful. Like, that seems to, whether that be love, whether that be grace, whether it be forgiveness, I go, that seems to be the more main default. We could certainly look at the cross and say, well, God's justice was fulfilled against Christ on the cross, and therefore the justice is paid, and therefore only mercy could be bestowed on us unless you're not in Christ, and then there's justice. I go, it's just like this weird psychological, philosophical loop that I just can't remedy. I do think in our humanness it is perplexing that you go, here's this person that did all these terrible things, and then they go, God, forgive me, and it's good. I get that. Part of me says, yeah, we've all got baggage though too, but I also acknowledge that, like, there's some people with their baggage is incredibly devastating to the human condition. And I don't know how to reconcile all of that. I get that we're all saved by grace, whether biggest sinner, littlest sinner, that's true. How that is fully just in every way, I don't fully understand. I get back to the justice of God is done in the person of Jesus, but I still wrestle with what you're wrestling with. So you get less an answer, and you get more of a, I'm a partner with you in the confusion. Hopefully you can appreciate that transparency on it. And again, like I feel like I'm dancing a little bit because I don't want to undermine, like, the essence of the good news of Jesus is we're all a bunch of sinners, and he rescues the sinners by suffering in our place in some way that I don't fully understand. But I think those sticky things are messy, and as humans, I guess at the end of the day when I go to bed at night, I'll say this. Okay, forgive me, my brain's working. Maybe too bad, I don't know. Years ago, 20 plus years ago, I was doing my first master's degree in philosophy. I was working on the problem of suffering and evil. By the end of that master's degree, I was a closet atheist serving as a pastor in a church. Right? Which I've shared this before. This isn't new unless you're new here, and then you're like, what kind of guy is this? And there was reasons for that. That would be a different story, different day. But it comes to that same core problem, right? It's still the same thing. Like, God, I can't reconcile the problem of suffering and evil. And how does this work when you're a good and loving God? And you tell us if we turn a blind eye to evil, we're bad. But if you turn a blind eye to evil, it's okay because you're sovereign. And like, your brain just starts spinning everywhere. And I kind of find this is in that same space of like, how do you deal with all of that? And then I just come to the end and I go, I have to trust God's got to figure it out. I just have to trust he has it figured out. I can't figure it out, but I have to trust he has it figured out. And that he's truly good and loving and merciful and just, and I don't know how to weld all those together in a convenient way. But again, I've got 3 pounds of gray matter trying to process that, and not even the best gray matter. Some of you got better gray matter than I do. So, yeah, I feel for the question. I can acknowledge that. And I have to just trust God at the end of the day, but I don't know what to do with it all.
How to tackle Bible reading as a beginner?
Oh, this was like last service. We had something similar. So the Bible Project. So we use those videos through the Sermon on the Mount, and then we kind of had a link to podcasts every week in the notes from the app. They are crushing it when it comes to not just biblical literacy, but I think understanding the essence of all these different, interesting pieces of literature inside this library because, again, some of the stuff is old, the languages are dead, we don't understand the background, culture, history, you name it, the syntax of the language. There's so many things that can make this kind of tough to read, especially as a seasoned person, it can be tough. So as a newbie, I would say the first thing is the BibleProject.com. I think it's .com, might be org, but Bible Project, if you just put that into your search engine, you'll find it. And they do all these great bite-sized videos that are actually really scholarly in their undercarriage, but they present it in a way that's really accessible. So if you're like, I'm going to read Leviticus, and I don't know what to do with that because it's wacky, watch their video and then read it, and you'll be like, oh, it's like all these, it makes sense of things differently. So that'd be one thing. The other is pick a very readable language when it comes to what Bible you can get. So there's two different philosophies on English translation. There's called formal equivalence and dynamic equivalence. Those are fancy ways of saying word-for-word translation that sometimes suffers in the realm of reading because it's so syntax broken that you're like, it's like Yoda wrote this. What do I do with this? Where like a New Living Translation is dynamic equivalent, which is idea for idea. So one is like word for word, the other is idea for idea. And sometimes the idea for idea is just way more readable than a word for word. And they give and take for different philosophies. I'd say pick an easy version and use the Bible Project stuff. That's really good.
Kind of got a follow-up to here. Let's see. My 5-year-old is talking about asking Jesus into their heart. Can you give me some tips on how to guide them through that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I remember when our kids did that too. And I think what's nice is, the faith of a child is like the best kind of faith. You know what I mean? And I think one of the things is you kind of don't overload them with too much of all of the details, and you're getting to the core of it, which is we're all estranged from God. We're not friends with God. And God wants to be friends with us, and Jesus is the one that made that friendship possible. I mean, that's Romans 5. Like, if you read Romans 5, you would see that that's really all Romans 5 is saying. We weren't friends with God. God wanted to be friends with us, and Jesus made it possible for us to be friends, right? And he did that not simply by the cross. I think sometimes what happens, especially with Protestants and evangelicals, is we anchor a lot into the cross and we forget resurrection. Not that we completely forget it, but we make the cross our symbol, and we forget that the resurrection is kind of like, hey, without the resurrection, the cross is kind of it doesn't complete the task. So I would actually say, his life, his death, his resurrection. I would go a step further and even say his ascension, but that's now a kid's like, what thing? But you just give them that core of like, Jesus made it possible for us to be friends with God because we're not friends with God. God wants to be friends with us. And this is how he made it possible. Jesus came, he lived, he died, he rose, so we can be friends with him. And then that's just so if you believe, you could do the prayer, anything that kind of has them understand they've taken ownership of it. So they could pray to receive Jesus in their life or to be in relationship to Jesus. I think that's great. And then really from there, I go back to what Jesus often said wasn't believe in facts about me. He said, follow me, right? Follow me is really the core of his invitation. So I think that's the other thing you're saying to a 5-year-old. It's like, now we're going to seek to be like Jesus in our lives because he wants us to follow him. So there's that entry thing, but then there is that follow thing. And I think you emphasize what we're really doing in the entry thing is the following thing. And I think you keep it as simple as you can for a 5-year-old. And I think that's really good, because your 5-year-old said, where do babies come from? You wouldn't give them the full science lesson. Right? They come from mommy's tummy, and when mommy and daddy love each other. I mean, you just do a different thing. And I think that simplicity actually helps anchor their faith in a real beautiful way. So I think it's just finding that simplicity. But the details of, again, that friendship, not friends, that's the sin problem. You could certainly illustrate their sin. Like, when you take your sister's toys all the time and you think it's funny and they're upset, that's not nice. That's sin. So you could anchor it in some practical things where they go, oh, that's what sin is, So you could do some of that too. But I think you keep it as understandable as they can get it. So.
Does turn the other cheek mean giving in to evildoers?
Maybe. I say maybe. We talked about this in the last service. I said that would be the one in the Sermon on the Mount I'd love to quiz Jesus on the most. I understand. So it might be in the short run, but that's what kind of overcomes things in the long run. And so I'll illustrate it with the early church. The early church was slaughtered by the thousands. And in part, they were slaughtered not just for their faith, but they also were non-retaliatory in the process of it. Like, they could have been like the zealots that wanted to take up arms against Rome, and instead they said, well, Jesus had to turn the other cheek, and so that's what we're going to do. And so they took their persecution with joy. They didn't rise up against their persecutors. And so in that sense, did they acquiesce to evil? You would have to say they did, in the sense of they didn't retaliate or fight. They didn't even self-defend often. They would hide, but they really wouldn't even self-defend. And yet, like the old statement goes, the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. It's like there's something about when people take it on the chin for Jesus and don't strike back after a while, it's hard to keep popping them on the chin. It's just something God uses. And I think for every one of us to have to wrestle with that is good to wrestle with it. But when it's been in play, it's been effective, but it's effective over marathons more than sprints. And that's part of I think the challenge of it is just it sometimes takes time to do that. I mean, you even saw it a little bit with Dr. King, or you might have even seen it with Gandhi. Gandhi very much pulled the same principles of the Sermon on the Mount for dealing with the British in India. And, they would walk up to a soldier and he would pop him down with the butt of his gun, and another one come up and they would hit it again, another would come and they hit him again, and another would come and they hit him again. Finally, after hitting 100, people of Indian descent in the population, the soldier's like, I can't keep hitting these guys down. They're doing nothing to retaliate. You just, after a while, you're like, I can't keep being the thug, That seems to be a little bit what Jesus is tempting us to consider in some of that. But everybody in their own conscience and their own circumstance has to wrestle through the wisdom of the situation too, and how you find those margins in your practical problem that you're facing in life, and how to turn the other cheek and everything else. I think our human nature is more often than not, though, to not turn the other cheek. And that's what Jesus is pressing on, kind of counter our nature a little bit. So practically, it's a little tough, which is why wisdom is so critical in how we do those things.
For non-believers or people who are still on the fence about Jesus, what would be your buy-in phrase or quote that could help them believe?
Honestly, I go back to my whole life is better with Jesus, which I know that seems really trivial, but probably because I tell my own story. Like when I go back to, so I'm doing this master's, I'm a closet atheist. What brought me back to my faith was not, I solved the problem of suffering and evil, or went, oh, there's the answer. So obvious, right? No, I went like, man, honestly, this is why I understand sort of the mindset of a disbelieving person. I remember in my disbelief feeling like I feel so enlightened. And I felt like there was a certain load off, like, man, there's no God. Just kind of pleasant thought a little bit, yeah? And now all these problems, I can just say they're just random craziness in the universe, and there's nobody to blame, So I think in that sense that there was a sense of illumination at first, but as time went on, there was this sense in which, but do you really feel like life is truly better? And I don't mean like it's going great, like marriage is good and the bank account's awesome. Just a sense of like, man, is this truly fulfilling? Is this the thing that is getting you out of bed every day? And so that life is better with Jesus is what brought me back. I'm like, life is better with Jesus in the sense of it's better to do life with him than apart from him. It's better to suffer with them than to suffer without him. It's better to do my marriage with him than my marriage apart from him. It's better to raise my kids with him than apart from him. It's better to interact with people in my world with him than apart from him. In particular, it's better to do the Sermon on the Mount toward people in my community than do whatever I feel like doing toward them in my community. And so all of that, for me, is kind of the thing. I just bring it back to that simplicity of like, in the Gospel of John, Jesus brings up the word life over 50 times. And a good chunk of those are in this life. He's trying to get to that idea. If it came to give you abundant life, John 10:10, and not just afterlife, this life. And so I think I would probably just tell my story and bring it to that. Because part of that too is acknowledging there's a bunch of stuff I don't know. There's a bunch of stuff I struggle with. There's a bunch of stuff I have questions on. I think that authenticity coupled to still loving Jesus can be really powerful in the lives of people. Not everybody, but I think a lot of people go, oh, that I can get behind that, because I think sometimes people don't cross the line because they also have illusions of what it is on the other side, and they think I'm not allowed to be certain things on the other side. Like I'm not allowed to have doubts. I'm not allowed to question. I'm not allowed to have a problem with X. I'm not allowed, and it's like you should come on our side for a while. You find out we're all a mess over here too. It's just we're doing it with Jesus, and that sometimes can be helpful as well, I think, in that process.
How do you recommend reconciling feelings of desire for the pain and suffering of a loved one to end, which may only be done with their death, with also feeling terrible for having those thoughts?
I like that other one. I feel you. Like, honestly, I wish that I could say, like, here's how you reconcile that. It's a mixed bag. Having been in that space more than once, I've been at a lot of deathbeds even in kind of what I do. And there has been more than a few times where my prayer is, would you please take them home right now? They're suffering, everybody around them suffering, and I don't know if it's a terrible prayer to pray that. Like, if you're seeing somebody suffering, you want the suffering to end. And so in some ways, I think that might be a mercy to want to pray that way. Not everybody's going to agree with me on that, but, I kind of probably look at it a little bit more that way. Like, yeah, I've seen terrible suffering. I remember one gal in particular, she was 38, brutal cancer. And man, her last 6 weeks was terrible. It was terrible. So bad. And I remember just that whole time. And her husband, wasn't a follower of Jesus, but she was, and everything else. And so I go visit. And it was just terrible. And if she wanted to go, I wanted her to go. I think if I was like, no, I want you to stay, that would be a bad thing in me, I think. This wasn't going to trend toward health. So, yeah, I think I don't know if that's, maybe they're more easily reconciled, because sometimes I think that's true mercy to feel for them that way and to have that pull in you. I get that. I think if we're all honest, we've had those circumstances, either persons or whatever else, where sometimes you go, is this a dark thought? And you're just like, I'm so fatigued. They're so fatigued. This is so hard. You just have those thoughts. They just pop in, man. Your brain decides to just throw stuff to the forefront you didn't ask for, and you got to wrestle with those things. So I appreciate that conundrum. I think, knowing a lot of people, there's probably been a lot of prayers of, if you took them now, that'd be great. I think that they would be good with that too. So, yeah, for sure.
If God knows everything, he knows what we're going to do. Does that mean our future is pre-planned? Are we able to change the sin we may commit? If God is all-powerful and loving, why doesn't he just not allow us to sin?
You tell me, man. I don't know. That goes into the problem of suffering and evil a little bit. It's like that same, unfortunately, these are the questions that we all can't wait to die to get there to ask him, dude, what the hey? What was with this, Because we don't know. Obviously, the idea that God knows the future, if you get into the philosophical stuff in theology on that, there is some really diverse thoughts on that. Like, God knows all conceivable futures, and then he allows us to work within all the conceivable futures to outline. So it's like the multiverse of Marvel or something like that. And so, and that's a legitimate, even for people that are called Calvinists, would be very everything's more predetermined. Inside even that group, there is, what's predetermined is he knows all the possible futures. And therefore, in that, one is unfolding all the time and is maybe jumping tracks, but he knows all of it. In that sense, it all kind of goes to the end. Others, it's every single thing to the minute detail is predetermined, all the way to others that go, well, actually, God, when he made the world, decided he didn't want to know the future, so he'd watch it unfold in real time as we're going through it in real time, so we could have authentic relationship with people. So across the Christian spectrum, there is all sorts of ideas on this. And the reason there is because none of us know the answer. And I think that's usually what happens. We're all trying to find a box to put it all in, and it's probably not quite that simple, because you could be like, well, if God knew before the foundations of the world that there was going to be sin, then why would God create a world in which there was going to be sin? And you're like, I don't know. Just don't know. I wasn't there. So, that's probably going to be the question all the time. That's going to be the question I have when I go to bed at night. So, I don't know if we know. We know that he knows the future. We don't know why he lets it play out as it does. Why does he wait so long to come back, right? You could be like, Jesus, when you rose from the dead, couldn't you have just made that the second coming and we're done, 2,000 years later, we're still rolling out with good and bad and pain and suffering, but beauty and art and love, and he's waiting for something, and we're riding along until we do and trying to be like him in the midst of it, so.
All right, I think we have time for about one more. Nobody's giving you any softballs this morning. So,
Man, this is a good group, dude.
know,
These
they're really
second
putting you through
service
the
questions,
paces.
they're really good.
What would you say to state or city public figures or church leaders, influencers, politicians who profess to be Christians and attend church weekly but are promoting misinformation, conflict, and disharmony on social media to help them live out the Sermon on the Mount?
I would say you need to look at the Sermon on the Mount more. So, I mean, honestly, like I get it. Like our worst nature comes out really easy, and the Sermon on the Mount is tough slogging. And in our moments of weakness, we're probably not going to lean into it. We're going to lean opposite of it. And I would just always bring it back to here's what I find a lot of us do, myself included. Sermon on the Mount's really good. You should pay attention to it more, right? And so instead of being like, Sermon on the Mount's really good, I need to pay attention to it a lot more. And I think that's probably my encouragement, because I think it is very easy to go like, I mean, there's people that I love, I see on social media, and they're like, these people aren't being Christ-like, and they suck. I'm like, right. Do you hear yourself right now? Because you're not either, And so, but I always bring it back to that. Like, okay, then I need to have jurisdiction over myself more than anybody else, first and foremost, because that's what Jesus says in chapter 7, right? When he says, hey, don't judge lest you be judged. He doesn't just end it there. He goes on to say, deal with the plank in your eye, then you can deal with the speck in their eye. But I love the way he spins that, because, again, we need to get to a state of authentic health. We're not now being judgy and we're going to go deal with their thing in a judgy way. We've kind of orbited past the judgment part of it, but we care about them, and we want to come in caringly and address that in them. So if I was in a circumstance, which I've been in recently, or I was trying to encourage a person to bring the salsa level down, I don't come and be like, hey, you suck as a Christian right now, and you're not helping anybody. That's not going to help at all. So instead, I'm like, hey, I know you're really spun up about this, but hey, here's a thought, maybe just to bring that down, because we've all got to be the difference makers. It's grassroots, it's got to start with us. And do we think that saying that on social media is going to get the ball down the field better, or is it just scolding people and creating more of the problem? So, but you can do it because you care about them. You're not frustrated at them. So that's what I'd say. It's like I have to be in a space where if I'm going to come alongside somebody and say, hey, we could do the Sermon on the Mount better as a community of faith, I have to be in a place that I can come and deal with that speck, right? Like my granddaughter had something in her eye, and I had to help her with that. And it was the perfect example of it. Like I don't go and like just start digging away at her eye. I have to be really cautious, and I'm careful, and I'm barely touching her eyeball and trying to get the little speck out. I think that's the spirit that Jesus is getting at. So that's why I would have to talk to somebody that maybe wasn't doing it that way, but I have to make sure that I don't have my own judgy baggage before I go do that, which it's hard. For all my talk about not being judgy, I'm really good at being judgy, man. I think we all are, and then I have to remind myself, whoa, I'm being judgy right now, or self-righteous, or whatever else. I got to get into a different headspace to be helpful to other people. So,
well, thank you, Pastor Matt. Can we show our appreciation to Matt being willing to sit up there and do this?
Thank you. No, you guys, those were some of the deeper, man, of all the years we've done this before. I'm like, life's getting complicated, man. You guys are asking really good, deep questions, which I'm like, I don't know. I suffer with you. I know that sometimes. So anyway, thank you for that. That was really cool. If you want to close this up, that would be rad, and we'll go from there.
Heavenly Father, we thank you for this past year and all the blessings you've heaped upon this congregation through opportunities you've given us and all different types of blessings, including this building. We pray that we'll continue to listen and seek out your guidance in opportunities in our lives every single day, that we will see people as you see them and look for opportunities to further your kingdom, no matter what it takes, no matter what it costs us, no matter how far we have to go. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.